Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile AF, the podcast. This is episode 183 called Allison M. Today's episode is sponsored by InCircle. If you guys have been around here for a little while, you may have heard this week's sponsor as a recurring guest on my show. It's my dear, dear friend, Abbe Feder, who founded InCircle Fertility after her own 6-year struggle with infertility. Abbe holds the hearts and hands of women and couples navigating the turbulence of infertility. I want to read you guys something one of Abby's recent clients wrote because it really resonated with me. She said, having Abbe and InCircle at your side throughout the IVF process is like having a mom without the drama, a sister without the competition, a cheerleader without the pom-poms, a best friend who lets you be very one-sided, and a therapist whose specialty happens to 100% directly overlap with what you're going through. I tell Abbe repeatedly that if she'd been my coach throughout my own infertility struggle, she'd have saved me a lot of nights crying on the bathroom floor. What I love about InCircle is that it provides a holistic approach from guidance on planning and decision-making to patient advocacy to day-to-day emotional support. All of this from somebody who has been there. And the coolest part is that InCircle is giving Infertile AF listeners a free 30-minute support session. So check out InCircleFertility.com/AliAF, that's ALIAF, and you will get your 30-minute support session from Abbe and InCircle. I really can't recommend them highly enough. Again, go to InCircleFertility.com/AliAF. Thanks, InCircle. Today's episode is presented by BELI. BELI offers modern prenatal vitamins optimized for fertility, prenatal, and post-pregnancy health. To learn more about how to optimize your fertility and pregnancy health, check out their vegan-friendly, dairy-free, non-GMO vitamins for both men and women at belibaby.com. That's spelled BELIBABY.com. The best part, if you use code ALLIE15, you'll get 15% off your first month of either BELI Women or BELI Men. Again, that's code ALLIE15, ALI15, for 15% off. Thanks, BELI. Okay, guys, so today I am talking to Allison, whose story begins with a diagnosis of leukemia at the age of 3 years old. Allison's going to tell me all about her diagnosis, going through chemo and radiation, and getting a life-saving bone marrow transplant from her sister, who was just 1 year old at the time. Now a childhood cancer survivor, Allison's going to tell me all about how her treatment as a 3-year-old came into play when it came time to try to have babies. So we're going to talk about freezing her eggs, having cysts on her ovaries, going through 2 unsuccessful rounds of IVF, and so much more. She's also going to talk about having a hysterectomy, using an egg donor and a surrogate, and how today she is the manager of the egg donor program at Conceivabilities, helping other people navigate egg donation and more. So it's an incredible story. She is a total badass. And without further ado, this is Allison's infertility story. Hello, Allison. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, let's dive right in. Tell me about you. And did you always want to have kids and be a mom?
Sure. So yes, I always wanted to have children. I am one of 3, and I'm very close to my family. I'm very close to my siblings. So I always knew that I wanted to start a family of my own. When I was 3 years old, I was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, and I was given actually a very short lifespan, but I was very lucky in that I was enrolled in a trial and I had a bone marrow transplant from my sister.
Wow.
Along with a lot of chemotherapy and radiation. So I was able to recover from that leukemia.
Oh my gosh, that must have been so much for your family to go through.
I mean, I can't, as an adult, I appreciate it so much more. And as a mom, I appreciate it so much more because, you know, as a 3-year-old, I don't think I obviously fully understood what was happening, but my mom was a young mom at the time. And I just can't imagine dealing with that. I can't handle my daughter when she has a cold,
Right.
let alone a really serious illness.
Yeah. Do you remember anything from that time?
So it's really hard to distinguish whether I remember actual things or I've seen pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that I remember a few, like there's a few days and a few things I remember, but I definitely know that I didn't know how sick I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think overall I remember it because I was so young.
Okay. Where were you guys? Where did you live?
So I'm originally from Boston, and I actually, after living in New York for many years, I still live there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was treated at the Dana-Farber and Children's Hospital in Boston.
Okay. How did they discover the leukemia in the first place? Were you just getting sick and
Sure, I was really sick, and I just could not. My mom could not get me better. I had a distended stomach. And she took me from doctor to doctor. And then finally, my pediatrician actually diagnosed me.
oh my gosh. I mean, it's just devastating to think about, like you said, as a parent, hearing that about your baby, like it's just I'm so grateful that you made it through and had such great care and the bone marrow, was the bone marrow kind of what helped you out in the end, or was it like
Yes.
a whole mix of things?
No, ultimately it was the transplant for my sister, who was only
Wow.
a year old at the time.
She was only 1 year old?
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's crazy. So when she was like right after she was born is when I was diagnosed.
Okay.
So my mom basically had a newborn and a newly diagnosed child.
Wow.
I know.
Was your dad in the picture?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
But my mom's kind of a force. Well, she is a force.
Yes. Okay. So fast forwarding to later, does this come into play in terms of your fertility story, this cancer diagnosis and, being a cancer survivor?
Absolutely. So,
Okay.
at the time, back in 1983, they were really throwing everything at me just to get me in remission. And that involved full body radiation and chemotherapy. So they weren't concerned or really knew the effects of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually remember when I got my period, they didn't even know if that was going to happen.
Mm.
And everybody was like very excited. And I remember I was like so embarrassed about it in general, let alone could not understand the excitement on it.
Right. Embarrassed because you're like, oh my God, stop talking about me and my period.
I was like, oh, this is so gross. What are you talking about?
Totally.
So, and I was like, stop telling everybody, Mom. Like she told like all my doctors.
Oh.
And like their excitement, I was like, I couldn't handle it. But now I understand why the excitement was, because they didn't actually know if that would ever even happen.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
I will say from like the age of 13 to 18, my fertility really isn't something I ever thought about or really came into play. And then when I was in college, I was having heavy bleeding. And I was getting cysts on my ovaries that were causing extreme bleeding and extreme pain.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through and removed the cysts, and I believe twice. And they were just not going away. So at that point, my doctor said to me, we really need to remove your ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want, you can try to freeze your eggs. I don't know how successful that's going to be.
Mm-hmm. How old were you?
I was 22 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, we had started with, trying to remove the cysts a number of times, trying different medication. And by 22, he was like, these need to come out. You just can't keep doing this.
Mm-hmm. What did that feel like to get that diagnosis and that, those directions that you have to do this? Was it scary?
It was really scary. I think those 2 years, at first with the cyst, I was like, okay, we'll remove the cyst and then we'll move forward. It's not something I have to worry about. And as things were progressing, part of me thought about, okay, what if I don't have ovaries? How am I going to have a child? What if I want to have a child? And I'm still fairly young at that point. I'm not in a serious relationship. So it's not something I'm immediately thinking about, but it's definitely in the back of my mind. And ultimately, I think what I thought about was, okay, well, even if I don't have ovaries, I can still carry a child at that time, which is how I felt.
Mm-hmm.
So that will be okay. So I did go through 2 unsuccessful rounds of IVF. There wasn't even any eggs to extract at that point.
Oh, wow. So did they determine that you like really didn't have any left after all the treatments and stuff, all the cancer treatment? Okay.
Exactly. They were, and, so I didn't even get to a retrieval standpoint. They both times they said, there's nothing to retrieve.
Okay.
And I'm sure, everybody kind of talks about sitting in that waiting room, waiting to get news, waiting to go to your monitoring appointments, and how like lonely that can feel. And it was really hard, especially for somebody who, was doing it alone, not in a relationship, just going to all those appointments myself. And also just being really scared as to not only what am I going to get any eggs, and also what is the future going to hold for my fertility? Because there were so many unknowns at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So once, after I tried twice, the doctor, who was very nice, just said, I cannot do this a 3rd time. We're not getting anywhere. And at that point, I did have my ovaries out, and I was still really hopeful that I could have, carry a child.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was still getting some bleeding, and, I think that I had been told eventually you're going to have a hysterectomy, but I wasn't hearing it.
Mm.
So, at some point I remember going to an oncology appointment with my mom, just to have a checkup, and my oncologist, and they both said to me, listen, like, I don't think you're going to be able to carry a child. And I was like, no, I think I can. So at that point, I was really in denial about it. I was, kind of basically telling my doctor, who was world renowned, and my mom, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to carry a child.
Yeah. I think that denial is a very common response sometimes when you have these crushing blows in life. Sometimes you're like, oh, no, that's not going to happen to me. It'll be fine.
And I think just like, as a child survivor of cancer and, everything, I was like, no, I'll be fine. I'll plow through it. I'll get through it, and I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what ended up happening a year later is I continued to have really heavy bleeding. And I was, at that point told, you have to have a hysterectomy.
Mm-hmm. Were you in pain?
Yes, I was in a ton of pain.
Okay.
And I didn't care. Like, I just really didn't want to have it. It felt like such a loss for me, and my mom kept saying to me, well, being pregnant was so horrible for me. I was so sick all the time. You're not missing anything. And it doesn't matter really what people say. There's nothing, when you're going through all of this, people can say exactly what you need to hear, but it's never the right thing.
Right.
So it didn't matter what she said to me at that time, but it was really a loss. I had a lot of health scares and a lot of health, setbacks, and I handled them all with what I felt was grace and very easily. But this really, and it makes sense, but it really threw me for a loop. And I think that in itself threw me for a loop.
Sure.
The fact that I was so upset and like devastated by this, knowing full well that there was other ways to have children, but just the fact that I was kind of told, like, this is it. You are not carrying a child. You're not having a child biologically. You are done, was really devastating and really took some time to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
And I very much think it is like a loss. It is like a death. You go through stages, anger, sadness.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think what, I did obviously get over it because, I had to move forward. And at the time I was actually working at Sloan Kettering, Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. And I was working with I started on with a project, which actually I think really helped me because I was working on a project where we were working with doctors who were diagnosing women and men who were young with, cancer and trying to get in there and talking to the doctors about talking about egg freezing, embryo freezing, sperm freezing before they start treatment.
Mm-hmm. Did you start working at MSK because of the cancer background that you had? Like, is that what got you interested in there?
That's a great question. I think because of my childhood, I've always been interested in healthcare. So I got my master's in health administration, health policy. And then I started working at MSK.
Okay.
But I
such a great place.
Yeah, it was an amazing place to work. And it was definitely because of, my history as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So
interesting.
And it was just wonderful to felt like, listen, like I couldn't save, my reproductive system, but I'm going to work on a project where we help educate and help save others. And that was, really rewarding for me. And we, really worked with doctors and said, listen, we understand that this boy is 15 years old and really doesn't even know if he wants anything to do with girls or, has so many other things. But if he spends an hour sperm banking, this is going to give him,
options for later. Yeah.
And it was a really, really rewarding program. And I really enjoyed it. And while I'm working at that, at the time I met my husband, Andrew, who was, at the time I started dating him. And very early on, I was very honest about, obviously, when you get serious with someone, you talk about children and how you see your life. And I was very early, honest about my diagnosis and everything and my childhood. And also just about the fact that, I want to have children, but it's not going to be the conventional way. And I actually, we first talked about it and then we got into more detail. We went out to dinner with my mom, who is almost like my historian, just because a lot of everything I don't remember. And we had like an amazing conversation. My husband held my hand the whole time and just, he took it all in and was like, okay, we'll just do what we have to do and we'll move forward. And it was just really an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And I really found my person.
When did you guys start talking about like, in earnest building a family?
I would say like within 3 months of dating, we talked about kind of how we see our future going. And at that point I was, I think I kind of danced around it a little bit. And at that point I was very honest about, how it would really work for me and how that would go.
And he just rolled with it, which obviously you said that's why he's your person, right?
Exactly.
I love that.
And, I always talk about the irony in the fact that all of this medicine, all of these treatments that, kept me alive also killed my opportunity to, have children the conventional way. So it's such a, catch-22.
Right. So tell me about when you guys started to try. What happened?
So originally, I knew from the beginning that, I think that I had kind of an advantage in the fact that I had already gone through all of these things. Like I knew I couldn't do IVF. I already had a hysterectomy. So from the beginning, I knew that I was going to need a clinic that was in a state that allowed egg donation, which is actually allowed in all 50 states, but also surrogacy. And we were living in New York and surrogacy was not legal at the time. So I spoke to some of my connections at MSK and they recommended some people to talk to. So they recommended, first I spoke to a reproductive lawyer who was based in New Jersey and also had her own surrogacy practice. And it was very eye-opening. I am highly educated, I'm pretty educated and I didn't understand that. And so I said to her, well, I want a surrogate who's Jewish like I am, who looks like me, who's educated. And she's like, no. She's like, what the hell are you talking about? She's like, you don't need a surrogate who looks like you. They're not going to be related to the baby, which I totally didn't understand. And she also said, you want somebody who's had a healthy birth, who's in a, stable relationship and, who can mentally handle this. She's like, all the other stuff really doesn't matter. And and I was like, well, what about someone who lives near me so I can be part of their journey? And she's like, no, that's not going to happen either.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of these surrogates don't live in, the Northeast, or, we want to make sure she's living in a state where, surrogacy is legal, and
right.
you're going to be able to, take your kid without any problems, which is really, mind blowing to me. I just assumed it would just be legal everywhere. There wouldn't be any problems. It's just amazing how much surrogacy really matters from state to state. It is fascinating.
I know. Did you know anything about it before you were thrust into this world? Because I certainly didn't. And
I knew nothing about it. I felt like she was speaking another language. I didn't even know who became surrogates. Like I don't even know. There was so much I didn't know. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like you have to have had a baby to be a surrogate, but like, why would I know that?
Right.
And yeah, I also didn't know that, that what was really interesting is that not only did they pick me, do I pick them? They have to pick me as well. Like I had no idea. I thought like I'd be looking at like hundreds of people and be like, oh, this person looks great. I literally had no idea.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. As we all know, life is full of twists, turns, and difficulties. Infertility can be a complete roller coaster, and we think it's important that you show up for yourself through it all. No matter what you're going through, BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. I personally went through 3+ very difficult years of infertility and recurrent pregnancy loss, and I definitely relied on therapy to help me get through it all. For me, therapy really improved my mental health. It helped me build back my self-esteem, reduce my anxiety, strengthen my coping mechanisms, and deal with the trauma of infertility and pregnancy loss. BetterHelp is not a crisis line, and it's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And here are a few very cool features. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, and you don't even have to be on camera if you don't want to. You can also change therapists if needed. BetterHelp makes it really easy to find the right fit. Plus, it's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is also available. As a matter of fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're recruiting additional therapists in all 50 states. But don't just take it from me, guys. Take it from one BetterHelp user who says, BetterHelp helped me tremendously with my issues that I had been suffering for 3 years now. My life is so much better now thanks to my therapist. So here's the deal. BetterHelp has a very special offer for all of you Infertile AF listeners. You can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/infertileaf. Again, it's 10% off your first month of online therapy by going to betterhelp.com/infertileaf. Thanks, BetterHelp.
This summer, the world's largest Christian music festival is back and better than ever. 40 days and 40 nights of gospel music is happening at the Ark Encounter in Northern Kentucky, featuring award-winning artists like the Isaacs, Ernie Haas, and Signature Sound, as well as inspirational speakers such as Ken Ham and Tim Lovelace. Catch it from August 2nd through September 10th with admission or annual pass to the Ark. Or visit 40daysofgospelmusic.com for more information.
Okay. So you're on the fast track and you're like quick learning curve, right? To figure all this out.
Really quick learning curve. And then I started talking to a clinic in New Jersey because we needed to do this. And I was living in New York, and New Jersey was the best place at that point to do it.
Because New York, it was still not legal, right?
Exactly. It was not
Gotcha.
to do surrogacy. So
it is now, thankfully, but only up until a couple of years ago, or not like just over a year ago.
Yeah, just over a year ago became legal, which is really, really exciting and about time. So we, on the fast track to working on the surrogacy piece, and then we started working on the egg donor piece. And I almost equate it to looking for, first, it was the same kind of process where I thought that I would have like millions of choices and so many people do this, and I could find someone exactly who I wanted. And I equated it to my husband to looking for a house, because at the time we were also looking at condos and houses.
Uh-huh.
Like, these are the things I must have.
Right.
I not buy this house without, all of these things. And then as you start to get in the process, you're like, well, maybe that's not as important.
Yeah. You're like, we don't need a yard. We don't need a sidewalk in front of the house. Yeah.
So, originally I was like, the person must have the exact same ethnicity as me. They must be close to my height. They must look exactly like me. But the bottom line is nobody looks exactly like you.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody has the same background as you. So that was also a huge learning curve for me, that I didn't really understand that. And, ultimately I wanted to work with somebody who had similar features to me, but, obviously not necessarily looked exactly like me and had a similar ethnic background, as I did, and who was healthy. Because ultimately this is such an expensive process and I could not go through it more than once.
Right. So how did you ultimately decide on your surrogate?
So ultimately the surrogate, so we found an egg donor who we really liked, and she was successful in creating embryos. And so we had them tested and frozen, and then we were working on the surrogate piece. And there's a huge wait to get a surrogate, even more so now. And so, ultimately the surrogate we were matched with, we got a call and they said, listen, there's an amazing surrogate who just became available. She was actually matched with another family. That family is no longer interested because they are getting divorced. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's one thing I guess that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, she's already done this before, but you have to meet her tomorrow, and you have to it was a video call, and then you have to make a decision. And I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh my God, this is such a huge decision. We were both traveling. We didn't even speak with her together. And, ultimately on paper, she looked great. She had done this before. She was young. She had 2 children of her own. She was in a very stable relationship. But I think it was also having the conversation with her, having a talk with her. She was putting me at ease. She was educating me on the process. And I just felt really comfortable with her, which is, really hard. But when you're working with anybody, especially in the healthcare, you should be comfortable with your clinician. You should be comfortable with the people you're working with. And I think that ultimately led me to her. And after the phone call, I was like, I really want to be on the journey with this person.
Yeah.
And she felt the same way. And so
right.
we I went from one day being like, I don't know when I'm going to get matched, to the next day, giving away my life savings and signing papers.
Absolutely. That must have been a good feeling though, to have a plan and have somebody that, you were really happy with, and then moving forward. Right.
Yeah. And this felt like, it had been going on for so long, just because, the journey of me, being sick and having children went on for so long.
Mm-hmm.
This felt like I was actually moving somewhere.
Right. Tell me about the embryo process. So you had the egg donor, and then did everything go smoothly in terms of that?
So I will say that we thought we were going to work with the clinic's egg donor program, but typically clinics have really small egg donor programs. And I just got tired of waiting, and they didn't actually have a lot of egg donors, and they kept saying, we're going to get more. And it was really no fault of their own. But I remember we were at a wedding and I got another email saying it was going to take another month. And I was like, that's it. I was like, I'm calling an agency.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can we do this? We're getting ready for a wedding. And I was like, nope. And I was emailing agencies at this person's ceremony. I was hyper focused on it. And so, I was patient, and then I became really impatient. I think, everybody only has so much time that they can wait, and so much patience. There's so many different start and stops to this whole process that I just had lost at that point. And we started working with an agency, and I remember we picked one egg donor, and we flew her out to our clinic, and she got there, and they had kind of talked about the process with her and about, the retrieval that obviously involves needles. And she was like, I'm out of here. I don't want to do this. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, did you think the eggs were going to be taken away with like butterflies? I
Right.
could not figure it out.
Okay.
And so we had to regroup, and I was like, this is bullshit. Like, and ultimately that just wasn't our person.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I found somebody else who I felt like was even a better match, who hadn't been on the site originally.
Mm-hmm.
And everything honestly went really smoothly with that person. She was local enough that she didn't have to fly. I think she took a train, and the process, the clinic kept telling me, she's lovely, she's really easy to work with. And it's really funny because my husband had to be in the clinic at the same time to create the embryos. And I just was like, this is wild.
Mm-hmm.
You guys aren't meeting and you're creating these embryos. And it wasn't that I didn't want to meet her. The way that it was kind of told to me was that, like, that's not a choice. This is anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's really not the way in which people present this. There's, options. Like if you want to meet your egg donor, most donors are open to that. And I'm only saying that because I work in this field, but, there are options and ways to meet the donor, but there's also 23andMe. So really nothing's anonymous anymore.
Right.
But it was that process itself after, a bit of start and stops went really smoothly.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. So then what happened when she did the transfer?
So she did the transfer. I was not able to be there, but my husband was there for the transfer. I believe I'm sorry. No, none of us were there for the transfer.
Okay. It's such a relatable thing though, because like not everybody is able to go to all these appointments because of either COVID or a work schedule, especially when you're an intended parent, can't go to all the surrogates appointments or gestational carrier. So it's tricky.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking like, no, because I remember this was a whole conversation. We couldn't be there for the transfer. And I remember being really upset about that. And that's why I did want a gestational carrier who lived near me. And ultimately, as my gestational carrier, she's like, it literally is not that long of an appointment. It's nothing is going to happen at this appointment. You don't need to stress about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I will say, like the benefit of having someone who's done this before is that
right.
She was so calming. She was like, I promise you're not missing anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And then, it's a little bit of a waiting game. And I remember she called me a few days after the transfer and said she was having some bleeding. And I was a complete wreck. And she's like, it's okay. If this doesn't work, we will do it again. Like, again, calming me, which was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But I left work. I was hysterically crying. I remember I called my mom and I couldn't breathe. And I said, there's some bleeding. I don't know. And she's like,
oh, it's so scary.
And my husband was traveling for work at the time because he was a consultant. And my mom said, I'll come to your apartment. We can be together. And I was like, no, I just want to be alone. And I remember I got to my apartment and I called my mom and I was like, where are you? And she was like, you told me not to come. And I was like, well, obviously I didn't mean that.
Right.
Don't you know what I mean? And I just remember being like completely irrational and crazy.
Not crazy. That's understandable. There's a lot of emotions going on.
Yeah. And it turned out that it was just a little bit of bleeding and she was fine. And she did get pregnant on the first transfer, which I acknowledge is very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously not something that happens all the time. And I was really, really lucky for that. But she did live in Virginia and it's like rural Virginia. So we went out there and I was, she would send us videos all the time and she'd send us pictures and updates from the doctor. But it really feels, there was definitely a disconnect. Like and maybe a good or bad way, but like, I wasn't really pregnant. So I was kind of just living my life.
Right.
It's bizarre. But then I'd have moments where I'd be like, okay, my baby is, so much old, but I don't really feel like I got it.
Yeah.
And then we did go and visit. Her and her fiance at the time said, come, you should come to a doctor's appointment. And we did go to a doctor's appointment. We went out to Virginia We met her whole family. We went to dinner and we went to the doctor's appointment. It was love. Like they are so lovely. We are still friends on Facebook. I send them, cards, and I would love Paige to meet. That's my daughter's name is Paige. I would love her to meet them one day.
Yes.
And she knows about the whole process, but
right.
Showed her pictures, but
yeah. I'm so happy that it worked for you. And you're right. It is very rare. I'm also of one IVF round that was successful, and it was the only round we were going to do with my son, secondary infertility. So I feel so, so lucky that it worked for me as well. It does happen sometimes on the first try, but for many, many people, it does not. So my heart goes out to anybody who's still in the wait and still, going round after round after round. Tell me about the day that your daughter was born.
So it was like a party. My mom, who's very involved in my life and in my daughter's life, and who has a great relationship with my husband. It was the three of us. And we went to Virginia, and it was amazing. My surrogate, and this is why she's a surrogate, was induced so we could be there, and was literally induced. And I swear to you, 45 minutes later, the baby popped out of her. And it's, her husband's in the delivery room. I'm in the delivery room. My mom's in the delivery room. My husband's in the delivery room. And it was just amazing.
It's so awesome.
So emotional. And my husband, cut the umbilical cord, and then they just give you this baby. And I'm sure everybody, regardless of how you became a parent, feels this way. But I was like, wait, what?
Right.
It's like, wait.
Yes, exactly. And we are supposed to do what with this now?
I was like, wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And just the way that the hospital worked was that they wanted to keep her in the hospital, but we couldn't stay in the hospital. So ultimately I had to leave the baby in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband's like, let's go to dinner. And it just felt so weird. I was like, but I just had a baby. And he's like, okay, but I need to eat food. And you didn't just have a baby. You also need to eat. So I remember my mom was like, well, I'm just going to stay a little bit longer. And I was like, to do what? But she was already in love with my daughter. They have a really special relationship. So she was like, I'm just going to stay longer. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go eat dinner. And so we then came back, as soon as we could the next morning. And, they did all the normal testing, and it still really felt surreal. And, because I'm still coming in and out of the hospital, hanging out with this baby who's mine, but I can still leave. It was very odd.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it turned out that there was going to be a huge storm. And if we didn't leave the day after she was born, we were going to potentially be stuck there for a few days.
Uh-huh.
And at that point, I just wanted to get home and start my life. So the doctor let us go after 26 hours. And I was really scared of flying with a newborn. And I had talked to my pediatrician about it. And he was like, people do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not, common, but it's not, people have to do it, and he's like, you'll be okay. And because I was like, I can also drive from Virginia. He's like, that's not a great plan either, and not great for your baby to be sitting in a cushion for that long.
Right. Exactly.
So he's like, that's not ideal either. And, he kind of made me feel like it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And, we went on the plane, and I was walking on air. I was so happy. And I think it also hadn't hit me at this point, I was having a child and how much my life really is changing.
Yeah.
Remember, I gave out earplugs to everybody around us.
Uh-huh.
And of course, she was quiet the whole time.
Okay.
We arrived in Boston, and my whole family was there to surprise us with signs.
Oh, wow.
It was so overwhelming. And I remember, at surrogacy, I was like, I want, even though I was so lucky, there were points where I was like, I want to go to a hospital in Boston and give birth and have all my family come and visit me. So there was definitely it was so amazing to have three people there, and so special, and, such a special experience. But there was still that period where I was like, I want to have family there.
Mm-hmm.
Me. And then of course everybody's like, no, you don't. They're just annoying, and you're exhausted, and you want to be alone. And I was like, yeah, but I need to feel that. So, and at that point, I did, it was so amazing to have my family there.
Uh-huh. That must have been amazing. So tell me about, I know that you're working now in this field, in this fertility world. What are you doing? And was it inspired by your own journey?
So absolutely, I still was working in the healthcare field and I loved it, but I was working, people don't really talk about this, a lot. And when anybody had a friend who was thinking about using an egg donor or a surrogate, they would always be like, oh, would you mind talking to my friend about it?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, my answer was always, of course. So finally I said, you know what, I really want to do this. Like, I want to go into a field. I want to talk about this and do this professionally. And now I work for an amazing company called Conceivabilities. And we do both surrogacy and egg donation. We work with clients. And I am the manager of the egg donor program.
Mm-hmm.
I work with both our egg donors, and I work with intended parents who want to use an egg donor. And I walk them through the process. And I also introduce them to egg donors who we have in our program and try basically to make a match with both parties. So, intended parents can, find egg donors just in the way that I found mine.
Uh-huh. So if somebody's listening that's embarking on this journey and going down the egg donor road, what's one or two things that you have learned, or like things that you wish you knew then that you know now?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing is there's so much about nurture versus nature. My daughter is not related to me at all, blood related, but we and it's also because we have the same mannerisms because she's my daughter. She's been with me since day one. She talks like me. She's rude to me and gives it right back.
Right.
She's my child. And I was so focused when I was looking for an egg donor, looking for the perfect egg donor who had every quality I had. But really, things that were important are really the health of the egg donor herself. And of course, you have to go with someone you're comfortable with, but ultimately, it's your child. And the other thing I felt like I lived fertility issues, especially once we started with the surrogacy and egg donor for a good 2 to 3 years. And that's all I thought about, all I talked about, all I dreamt about, all I ate about, to the point of exhaustion.
Yeah.
Once you have a child, you don't think about it anymore. I mean, I do because I am working in this field and I'm trying to help people. But, ultimately you will get through this and you will just think of your child as your child, not as the child that you had via egg donor.
Mm-hmm.
And someone equated to me, we were talking about breastfeeding and I couldn't breastfeed and I was kind of upset about that. And someone's like, you talk about it so much in the first 6 months, and it's usually because someone's having a problem with it. They're like, but ultimately, you're not going to meet whoever you're friends with when your kid is 1 or 2 and be like, oh, did you breastfeed? And they're like, nobody cares. It doesn't matter. It doesn't become an issue anymore. And that's how I kind of think about, conceiving a child. It's obviously so devastating, especially when you can't and it doesn't come easily. But once you have that child, it's all you're thinking about is that child and raising that child. And it doesn't matter how you got that child.
Thank you all so much for listening to Allison's story, and definitely check out Conceivabilities. And also, if you guys are looking for more support, check out Fertility Rally. It's the place I wish I had when I was going through it. You can check us out on Instagram at Fertility Rally or our website, which is fertilityrally.com. We offer 4 support groups a week, 3 private Facebook groups, tons of content, tons of videos, IRL events. Our next rally live, our 5th rally live, is coming up in October, and so much more. So Blair and I have created this space for you. It's a safe space. It's a non-judgment zone. Everybody is welcome, no matter what you're going through. So definitely reach out to us and ask questions. We open the first week of the month for new members. So our next opening will be the 1st of September, and we are happy to answer any questions that you guys have. But we would love to have you be part of our family. It doesn't matter where you live. We're global because everything's pretty much virtual. So definitely reach out to us, give yourself the gift of support, and spread the word to any friends who might be looking for some extra support too. All right. Thanks again. I'll talk to you guys next time.